Page 1614. Page 1615. Page 1616. Page 1617. Page 1618. Page 1619. Page 1620. Page 1621. Page 1622. Page 1623. Page 1624. Page 1625. Page 1626. Senator Ibrahim Oluragbe.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, my name is Ibrahim Oluragbe. I represent Kwara Central. I rise to move that this Senate do adopt the voter proceedings of Tuesday, the 19th day of May 2020. I so move, Mr. President.
Senator Mpigi Baronado.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. I rise to second the motion to adopt the vote and proceeding of Tuesday, 19th May 2020. As a second, Mr. President.
Distinguished colleagues, those in favor of the motion that the votes and proceedings of Tuesday, 19th of May 2020 be approved, say aye. Those against, say nay. The ayes have it. The votes and proceedings of Tuesday, 19th day of May 2020 is hereby approved. Letter from Mr. President. Dear distinguished Senate President, submission of the revised FGN 2020 to 2022 medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy paper and revised appropriation bill 2020. It is with pleasure that I forward the revised 2020-2022 medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy paper and the revised appropriation bill 2020 for the current consideration and approval of the Senate. Let me seize this opportunity to express my deep gratitude for the patriotism, cooperation, and support of the leadership and distinguished members of the Senate in our collective efforts to amend the Appropriation Act 2020 and accelerate its implementation. It has become necessary to revise the 2020-2022 MTEF FSP and amend the Appropriation Act 2020 in view of the sharp decline in crude oil prices and the cut in Nigeria's crude oil production quota occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic. In effect, The assumptions underlying the 2020 Appropriation Act are no longer sustainable. It is also imperative to adjust expected revenues, considering the widespread disruptions in other domestic economic activities, as well as international trade and transportation, due to the measures implemented across the world to curtail the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. Furthermore, it is necessary to reallocate resources in the Appropriation Act 2020 to ensure effective implementation of required emergency measures and other actions necessary to mitigate the negative socioeconomic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Accordingly, I hereby forward as Appendix 1 and Appendix 2 respectively, being the revised 2020-2022 MTEF FSP and the revised Appropriation Bill 2020. Given the urgency of the requested amendments, I seek the cooperation of the National Assembly for expeditious legislative action on these submissions. Please accept, distinguished Senate President, the assurances of my highest consideration. Yours sincerely, Muhammadu Buhari. Letter from Mr. President. Dear distinguished Senate President, request for approval for external borrowing. 1. To finance the proposed revised 2020 budget. 2. For priority projects of the federal government. And 3. For projects to support the state governments. In accordance with the provisions of Section 21 of the Debt Management Office Establishment Act 2003 and Section 41 of the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007, I wish to request the approval of the Senate of the Federal Republic of Nigeria for external borrowing to finance the following. 1. The draft revised 2020 budget. 2. Priority projects of the federal government of Nigeria. And 3. Projects to support the state governments. Financing the proposed revised 2020 budget. As the Senate may be aware, the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in economic and physical challenges for many countries. Nigeria has also been affected in this regard, especially with the lower demand for crude oil, which has affected ourselves, and the sharp decline in the price of oil below $25 per barrel, which is much lower than the $57 per barrel benchmark in the 2020 Appropriation Act. The COVID-19 pandemic has also created the need for additional expenditure in the health sector. All of these have necessitated a review of the 2020 budget and the medium-term expenditure framework 2020 to 2022. Following from paragraph 2, the draft revised budget proposed by the executive for 2020 has a higher deficit. In order to finance this deficit, the federal government is planning to raise funds from both domestic and external sources. For the external component, the government is negotiating with multilateral institutions for funding on concessionary terms. The facilities totaling $5.513 billion been arranged in this regard are detailed in Table 1. Proposed external loans to finance revised 2020 budget deficit. 1. International Monetary Fund, IMF, US dollars 3.4 billion. 2. The World Bank, $1.5 billion. 3. African Development Bank, $500 million. And 4. Islamic Development Bank, $113 million. Total, $5.513 billion. Priority projects of the federal government. In addition to the financing required for the revised 2020 budget, financing is also required for some priority projects of the federal government to address the COVID-19 pandemic and improve Nigeria's food security. The proposed loans and associated projects in this regard are detailed in Table 2. 1. Islamic Development Bank Project, support of Nigeria's response to challenges posed by COVID-19, an amount $600 million. African Development Bank Project, strengthening of healthcare system to improve response to COVID-19, amount $125 million. Financing smallholder farmers to mitigate food security impact of COVID-19, amount $23 million. 3. African Export-Import Bank, provision of critical medical supplies to combat COVID-19, amount $500 million. 4. Export-Import Bank of Brazil, project Green Imperative to enhance mechanization of agriculture and agro-processing in Nigeria, amount €995 million. The Islamic Development Bank has indicated that only $130 million of financing will be available to the federal government of Nigeria in the 2020 fiscal year to enhance the government's COVID-19 response, which will come from restructuring of previously approved but inactive facilities for Nigeria. Facilities for projects to support state governments. The state governments are also experiencing fiscal challenges as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in order to support the states, facilities from the World Bank are being negotiated as detailed in Table 3. The facilities to support state governments. 1. The World Bank. State project, State Fiscal Transparency, Accountability and Sustainability Program to provide fiscal support to the states. Amount between $500 million and $750 million US. 2. The World Bank. COVID-19 Action, Recovery and Economic Stimulus Program to support state-level efforts to protect livelihoods, ensure food security, and stimulate economic activity, between $500 and $750 million. Please find attached relevant documents for the facilities. The Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning shall provide any additional information that may be required for your consideration of the request. Whilst looking forward to your timely consideration and approval, please accept the Single Senate President the assurances of my high regards. Signed, yours sincerely, Muhammadu Buhari. Petitions, Senator Ezama Oyauchi.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. My name is Senator Ezama Oyauchi. I represent Imo East Senatorial District. Mr. President, I have a petition from a coalition of Imo youth groups. The petitioners are drawing the attention of the National Assembly to over 96 youths, also known as Amajiris, who came into Imo State during the ban on interstate travel. Mr. President, the petitioner states that after beating various security checks, they were intercepted by the Imo COVID-19 management team for contravening the ban on interstate travels. They further state that as part of NCDC guideline and protocol, blood samples were taken from the 96 youths, and they assert that in a sudden twist of event, these 96 youths were released and allowed to go before their test results came back. They assert further that when the results of the blood samples came back, 26 of them tested positive for COVID-19. The petitioners are worried that the release of these 96 youths into the state poses a great health challenge to citizens. They are therefore urging the National Assembly to investigate the curious circumstances surrounding the release of the 96 youths and how they moved into the state during the interstate travel ban. They also want the security agencies to ensure that these youths are apprehended, treated, and rehabilitated. Mr. President, they are not seeking any judicial remedy at the moment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Well, since they are not seeking any judicial remedy, you may lay the petitions, please.
Point of order, Mr. President.
The petition is hereby referred to the Senate Committee on Ethics, Privileges, and Public Petitions to report back in 2 weeks. Petitions? Petitions? Okay, point of order. Senator Uche Okunifeyo.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, my name is Senator Uche Lilian Okunifeyo. Mr. President, I come from Anambra State. Mr. President, my point of order is order 43, personal explanation. Mr. President, I want to notify my colleagues that yesterday, being 27th of May, was Children's Day celebration. I just want to use the opportunity to give my colleagues the synopsis of this very important history. Mr. President, Children's Day is a day dedicated to celebrate childhood. It is also on this day that tribute is paid to all children in the world. The International Children's Day had its origin in Turk in 1920, and later in the World Conference for the Well-being of Children in Geneva, Switzerland in 1925. Children's Day was first celebrated worldwide in October 1955 under the sponsorship of the International Union for Child Welfare in Geneva. The idea of a universal Children's Day was mooted by Robert Mansour and adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1954. It was first proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly in 1954. It was also established to encourage all countries to institute a day, firstly to promote mutual exchange and understanding among children, and secondly to initiate action to benefit and promote the welfare of children across the world. May 27 is traditionally the Children's History and Holiday in Nigeria. It was first established by the United Nations in 1964. The day remains important in the lives of many Nigerian kids as well as adults and parents. It is on this day every year, children are granted a holiday while several social activities are centered on them. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, further information from UNICEF as at 2010 states that 6.3 million childbirths occur in Nigeria annually. This shows how important children are in Nigeria's national statistics. It is on that note, Mr. President, I want to crave indulgence of these distinguished colleagues for us to celebrate another Children's Day that happened yesterday. In doing that, parents should sincerely evaluate their parent-child relationships and strive to enhance positively by paying more attention to their children when they're at home and when they're at school. And government at all levels should also invest in child's education and welfare. May I crave indulgence of this distinguished audience to please stand up and salute Nigerian children by giving them 1 minute in their honor. Mr. President, I thank you for this privilege. And I also want to remind you, Mr. President, that 60 years ago, you were just a toddler. And I can imagine how you were looking there. And to all my colleagues here, we used to be children, but today we are adults and legislators and senators, the highest law-making body in Nigeria. Therefore, let us remember when we started. That is why we must honor Nigerian children. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, distinguished Uche. Let me, no, she came under personal explanation, so it's not a debate and there will be no prayers or standing up. But let me, on behalf of all the distinguished senators and indeed members of the National Assembly, congratulate the Nigerian children for the Children's Day that took place yesterday. As a government, we are responsible for these children wherever they are in this country. Nigeria has the unenviable position of number one country with most out-of-school children in the world. We have to reverse this trend. The 14 million children out of school who today are walking our streets remain our responsibility. We have to give them education, proper education. We have to prepare them to be good citizens. And therefore, I will take this opportunity to ensure the Nigerian children that the Senate and indeed the National Assembly will work together with the executive arm of government and indeed the state governments to ensure that we address the issue of out-of-school children, because this is a time bomb for us. And it's only fair that we do everything between the two levels of government to ensure that we address this. Our children may be going back to schools. We don't know when. But when eventually they'll be called back to schools, we need to prepare for the new realities in the schools. COVID-19 pandemic challenge remain real, and our schools may never be ready to receive our children without taking some measures. I will take this opportunity to urge our committees on basic education and tertiary education to work very closely with the Ministry of Education to see the state of preparedness of our schools. We must insist on certain enabling environments. How do they wear masks, especially at the basic level? The washing of hands, the hygienic part of this campaign, the availability of sanitizers, how the teachers are able to handle them, because this is a new normal for us. So this, once again, I want to thank you for reminding the Senate that yesterday was the Children's Day, and we associate with our children while we stay together at home with them. We should continue to teach them those basic things that are required of us: social distancing, washing of hands, using sanitizers, and so on and so forth, because it's not only in schools. While they're at homes, they remain also our responsibility. Thank you very much. Point of order, Senator Ibrahim Abdullah.
Sir, I will come under order 43. Yes.
You may read, please.
By the indulgence of the Senate and the leave of the President of the Senate, a senator may make a personal explanation, although there be no question before the Senate. But no controversial matter may be brought forward, nor may debate arise upon the explanation. The terms of the proposed statement shall be submitted in detail to the President of the Senate when his leave to make it so. It's sought. Your Excellency, I just want to make some explanation here.
Very unfortunate, yesterday we had a very difficult situation in my local government. In the local government, we lost 75 people yesterday to the bandits. They came in, they rounded the villages. In Garki, they killed 25 people. In Adwa, they killed 13. In Katuma, they killed 6. In Kuzari village, they killed 25. And in Masa, they killed 5 and took away 1. Altogether making 74. And in the area of Ilela, they took 3, they killed 3, took 5. In Guadayo, on Salah, they killed 4 people, both the imam and then the other person. In Guadaba, they also abducted a lot of people, Rabah, Isa, Urla, and Gada. So you can see that in the whole of that zone, it's a problem. Because of this activity that is taking place in Zamfara area and Kasina, they are all moving towards that area and then killing our people. So I think there must be a coordinated approach so that at the same time this can be done. Your Excellency, distinguished colleagues, I would like the entire Senate to help us in prayers so that at least we pray for the souls of those who departed. At least a minute's silence, Your Excellency. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, distinguished Chairman. Because you have come under personal explanation, there is no debate on this. But let me also reiterate that there is need to continue to have coordinated efforts at fighting banditry in the Northwest particularly and the country in general. And I believe that this war is winnable, and we have the capabilities at the moment once we coordinate our attacks, sustain attacks. With this, let me call on us for 1 minute silence in honor of those who lost their lives to armed banditry and other criminal activities by criminal elements across the country. 1 minute silence, please. May the souls of our departed compatriots rest in perfect peace. Amen. Leader of the Senate.
Mr. President, my highly respected and distinguished colleagues, the first business of the day is the presentation of a bill standing in the distinguished name of distinguished Senator Abdul Fattah Buhari on the Nigerian Railway Corporation Act, Cap N129, Laws of the Federation of Nigeria 2004, Repeal and Reenactment Bill 2020. Mr. President, you may wish to invite the Clerk of the Senate to read the short title of the bill.
Clerk of the Senate.
Mr. President, distinguished senators, Nigerian Railway Corporation Act, Cap N129, LFN 2004, Repeal and Reenactment Bill 2020, first reading.
Nigerian Railway Corporation Act Cap N129 LFN 2004, Repeal and Reenactment Bill 2020 SB 426, first reading taken. Leader of the Senate.
Mr. President, my highly respected and distinguished colleagues, the second business of the day is the presentation of a bill standing in the name of distinguished Senator Abdul Fattah Buhari on the National Transport Commission Establishment, etc. Bill 2020. Mr. President, you may wish to invite the Clerk of the Senate to read the short title of the bill.
Clerk of the Senate.
Mr. President, distinguished senators, National Transport Commission Establishment, etc. Bill 2020, SB 427, first reading.
National Transport Commission Establishment, etc. Bill 2020, SB 427, first reading taken. Leader of the Senate.
Mr. President, my highly respected and distinguished colleagues, the third business of the day is the presentation of a bill standing in the name of distinguished Senator Michael Opeyemi Bamidele on the Tertiary Education Trust Fund Act 2007, Amendment Bill 2020. Mr. President, you may wish to invite the Clerk of the Senate to read the short title of the bill.
Clerk of the Senate.
Mr. President, distinguished senators, Tertiary Education Trust Fund Act 2007, Amendment Bill 2020, SB 428, first reading.
Tertiary Education Trust Fund Act 2007 Amendment Bill 2020 SB 428, first reading taken. Leader of the Senate.
Mr. President, my highly respected and distinguished colleagues, the fourth business of the day is the presentation of a bill standing in the name of distinguished Senator Olubimi Ayodeji Adetunbi on the 1999 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria Alteration Bill 2020. Mr. President, you may wish to invite the Clerk of the Senate to read the short title of the bill.
Clerk of the Senate.
Mr. President, distinguished senators, 1999 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria Alteration Bill 2020, SB 429, first read.
1999 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria Alteration Bill 2020, SB 429, first reading taken. Leader of the Senate.
Mr. President, my highly respected and distinguished colleagues, the fifth business of the day is the presentation of our bill standing in the name of distinguished Senator Gashon Basi on the Petroleum Production Price and Regulatory Agency Act 43, Laws of the Federation of Nigeria 2004, Amendment Bill 2020. Mr. President, you may wish to invite the Clerk of the Senate to read the short title of the bill.
Clerk of the Senate.
Mr. President, distinguished senators, Petroleum Product Pricing Regulatory Agency Act, Cap P43, LFN 2004, Amendment Bill 2020, SB 430, first reading.
Petroleum Product Pricing Regulatory Agency Act, Cap P43, LFN 2004, Amendment Bill 2020, SB 430, first reading taken. Leader of the Senate.
Mr. President, my highly respected and distinguished colleagues, the sixth business of the day is the presentation of the report of the Committee on Federal Character and Intergovernmental Affairs on the screening of persons as listed in the order paper for the appointment as chairman and members of Federal Character Commission. Mr. President, you may wish to invite distinguished Senator Danjo Mala, chairman of the committee, to move the motion for the Senate to receive the report.
Distinguished Senator Danjo Mala.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am Senator Lad Juma, represent Kaduna South. That the Senate do receive the report of the Committee on Federal Character and Intergovernmental Affairs on the confirmation of the nomination of the foreign person for appointment as chairman and members of the Federal Character Commission. With your kind permission, I should please move to lay the also move.
Any seconder, please. Yeah, Senator Basi Albert.
Thank you, Mr. President. My distinguished and colleagues, Senator Albert Basi Akabo, not even the President.
I rise to second the motion ably moved by the Chairman, Federal Character Committee, that the Senate do receive the report of the Committee on Federal Character and Intergovernmental Affairs on the confirmation of the nominations of the following persons for appointment as chairman and members of the Federal Character Commission in the President is so second.
Distinguished colleagues, those in favor of the motion that the Senate do receive the report of the Committee on Federal Character and Intergovernmental Affairs, say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Declare the report, please. Thank you. Leader of the Senate.
Mr. President, in view of the communications you have just read from Mr. President, Commander-in-Chief, I would like to move two motions. The first one, relying on the order paper 1, on our order 1B1, I move that the 2020 to 2022 medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy paper and request for external borrowing be referred to relevant committees of the Senate to report back within 1 week, given its importance and urgency, and particularly for the fact that we meet and at plenary only once a week. I so move, Mr. President.
Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I so second.
Those in favor of the motion moved by the Senate Leader and seconded by the Minority Leader say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. The presidential communications hereby refer to the Senate Committees on Finance and Foreign and Local Desk to report back by Tuesday. Those in favor of this motion say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. The Senate Committee on Finance will be responsible for processing the MTF, FSP, and the Senate Committee on Local and Foreign Desk is to work on the foreign borrowing plans request. And we expect that by Tuesday, all the reports will be laid before the Senate. So you have between today and Monday to work, but to continue with what you have started already with Ministry of Finance and the relevant agencies. Thank you very much. Leader of the Senate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, my second motion is that by virtue of the communication read by the President of the Senate on the 2020 Appropriation Act Amendment Bill, I move that this Senate suspend its Rule 79, subsection 1, in order to read the 2020 Appropriation Act Amendment Bill the second time. So moved.
Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I so second.
So, colleagues, those in favor of the motion that will allow us to have a second reading of this bill, the 2020 budget amendment request, say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Leader of the Senate.
Mr. President, my highly respected and distinguished colleagues, this is my lead debate on the 2020 Appropriation Act Amendment Bill 2020, Senate Bill 425. Mr. President, my highly esteemed and distinguished colleagues, permit me to lead the debate on this very important bill, which seeks to authorize the issue out of Consolidated Revenue Fund of the Federation, the total sum of 10,509,654,033,054 naira, out of which 398,505,979,000 naira, 362 naira only is for statutory transfers. 2 trillion.
Order. Are the copies not available? So who is this? The other side too? Okay, leader, you can proceed.
Now that maybe all of our colleagues have the paper, I would like to, with their permission, to start afresh. Mr. President, my highly esteemed and distinguished colleagues, please permit me to lead the debate on this very important bill which seeks to authorize the issue out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the Federation a total sum of 10,509,654,033,054 naira only, out of which 398,505,979,362 naira only is for statutory transfers. 2,951,710,000,000 naira only is for debt service. 4,928,525,467,849 naira only is for recurrent non-debt expenditure. While the sum of 2,235,912,585,842 naira only is for contribution to the Development Fund for capital expenditure for the year ending 31st December 2020 as against the earlier passed Appropriation Act in the sum of 10,592,364,830 naira. Mr. President, my highly respected and distinguished colleagues, you recall that the President Commander-in-Chief, through a communication to the President of the Senate, forwarded the 2020 Appropriation Act Amendment Bill 2020 to the Senate, which was read on the floor of the Senate today, Thursday, 28 May 2020, by the President of the Senate. The bill was read for the first time in this chamber by virtue of Mr. President's communication. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, we recall that 2020 budget was predicated on an oil production of 2.18 million barrels per day and a benchmark oil price of $57 per barrel and at an exchange rate of 305 naira per dollar. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, following the outbreak of coronavirus disease, COVID-19, and its rapid spin into a global pandemic in the first quarter of 2020, there has been corresponding economic consequences. there has been a slowdown of global economic activities as most countries are on lockdown, with movement only limited to essential goods or persons performing essential services. Correspondingly, international oil prices have plunged, triggered by the Saudi-Russia oil war and weakening of domestic demand. Further to the above, most of the assumptions underpinning the 2020 Federal Government of Nigeria budget have had to be revised in the face of current realities, as Nigeria is vulnerable to the current global economic disruption caused by a COVID-19 crisis, which has led to decline in crude oil prices and spikes in risk aversion in the global capital markets. Prior to the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Nigerian economy had been characterized by wavering external sector and improving internal economic indicators. Over-dependence on oil revenue, constrained fiscal space, low foreign and domestic investments, and declining foreign reserves made the economy disproportionately vulnerable to the twin shocks of crude oil price or production collapse and a health crisis affecting negatively the informal sector, which accounts for over half of the Nigeria's GDP. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, currently Nigeria's foreign reserves have declined to $35.9 billion in March 2020 from the high of $44.7 billion in April 2020. The decrease is largely attributable to the impact of the decline in crude oil receipts. The uncertainty and general decline in global economic activities caused by the COVID-19 pandemic have further dimmed the prospect of reversing the downward trend in foreign portfolio investments in the Nigerian Treasury bills, also adversely impacted by the COVID-19 inspired flight safety. This represents the second biggest source of dollar inflow into the country after crude oil. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, following the revision of key macroeconomic parameters, projected oil revenues for 2020 have been significantly reduced. Adjusted downward also are non-oil revenue projections, including various tax and custom receipts. Additionally, the first line deductions by NNPC for federally funded upstream projects and expenditures have been significantly reduced by 65% from 1.223 trillion to 424.23 billion. These cuts include the removal of 457.5 billion provision for premium motor spirit under recovery, for the reintroduction of a price modulation mechanism tied to international oil price movement as the basis for pricing PMS going forward. The aggregate revenue available to fund the 2020 budget is now projected at 5.09 trillion naira. That is 35% or 2.78 trillion less than the 2020 budget passed by the National Assembly. 26% of this is projected to come from oil-related sources, while the balance is to be earned from non-oil sources. The provision of stamp duty was reduced to 200 billion from 465.95 billion, while signature bonus is down to 350.52 billion from 939.30 billion. With the retained revenues of the 10 major government-owned enterprises, the aggregate federal government revenue is projected only at 5.56 trillion. In order to forestall or at least slow down a decline into another recession, the federal government did not set out to implement an austerity-style cuts in expenditure. However, in a bid to reprioritize government spending, some non-essential and deferrable expenditure, especially those classified administrative capital expenditure, were reduced in favor of growth-enhancing, pro-poor funding expenditures and social sector investments in order to combat the current pandemic as well as its negative impact on the economy. The federal government's expenditure budget, that is including grants and donor funding, is estimated at 10.51 trillion, that is inclusive of project-tied loans finance projects and expenditures of 10 government enterprises, down from 10.59 trillion in the 2020 Appropriation Act. Debt services is estimated at 2.68 trillion, while provisions for sinking fund to retire maturity bonds to local contractors and creditors is 272.9 billion naira. The provision for personnel and pension costs was retained at 2.83 trillion and 536.72 billion, respectively. The sum of 25.56 billion, representing 1% of the consolidated revenue fund, has been provided for the basic healthcare provision fund. Other critical provisions, such as the 22.73 billion for routine immunization in the service-wide votes and 81.14 billion for the power sector reform program, has been retained. The aggregate amount available for capital expenditures, exclusive of capital and statutory transfers, is in this reserve of 2020 budget is 2.23 trillion, consisting of 1.264 for MDAs, 100.3 billion for COVID-19 expenditures, 20 billion for capital component of the special intervention program, 274.85 billion for other capital supplementation, 141.17 billion capital budget for 10 government-owned enterprises, and 42.96 for donor grant-funded expenditures, and 387.30 billion funded by project-tied loans. The 2020 Appropriation Act, my distinguished colleagues, amendment bill, is now predicated on oil production of 1.93 million barrels per day and a benchmark oil price of $35 per barrel. It's 25, not 35. I mistake there. The official exchange rate has also been adjusted upwards to 360 per $1 by the Central Bank of Nigeria. At the importers and external foreign exchange inflow market or window, where the bulk of foreign exchange transactions are consummated, the exchange rate recently depreciated from about 360 per $1 in January 2020 to over 385 per $1. While the CBN continues to make strenuous efforts to stabilize the exchange rate, it is generally expected that the Naira will further suffer devaluation, as Nigeria is projected to lose about $26 billion in oil revenue, which is its principal source of foreign currency. Finally, my distinguished colleagues, I believe that all the proposals in this revised 2020 appropriation bill are laudable and imperative to support economic activities and mitigate the diverse effects of COVID-19 shocks, as well as enhance the critical needs of the citizens of this country. My colleagues will further know that in spite of the loss of revenue, the effort here has actually been to increase our debt or budget deficit in order not to allow the economy to collapse. Any effort to adjust and bring down the consumption and also the investment-related part of this budget will lead to terrible depression, which is going to hurt everybody around the corner. So you will note that the reduction from the 2020 approved budget to this revised budget is not that much. So this budget is more like a stimulus to allow the economy to stabilize, so that we do not enter into a massive recession that could undermine our capacity to operate as a workable and strong economy capable of sustaining the capacity of Nigerians to produce now and in the future. I thank you, Mr. President. I thank you, distinguished colleagues.
Any contributions? Okay. The Deputy Chief Whip.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. I'm Aliu Sabi Abdullahi. I represent Niger North Senatorial District. I'm from Niger State. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I want to support this very important amendment bill, which is timely, which is apt, and the issues are very straightforward, even though this is happening at a very difficult and complex time. The point I would like to add here is to say that, of course, if we were buoyant, perhaps this is the time to increase economic activity so that we can at least mitigate the shock that has been brought about by the pandemic. But I want to say the effort here is modest and it's one that needs our total support. And in particular, I'm very concerned about the aspect of food security, because whatever we do where food security is not being catered for, then definitely no stimulus will get people back to work. I therefore support this bill. I urge my colleagues to do so. The detailed issues, I'm sure, when the committee gets down to work, they'll be able to thrash out those issues for us. And at the end of the day, I'm convinced beyond reasonable doubt that this Senate will definitely do what is in the best interest of Nigerians so that we'll be able to take care of our problems using our own homegrown solutions. With this, I urge my colleagues to support this bill. Thank you.
Senator Mahmoud Adamalero.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. Almir Mohammed Adamaleru, representing Kebbi Central. Mr. President, this is a very realistic, amendment in view of the fact that we all know what is happening globally. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected virtually all economies of the world, and ours is not an exception. And for that reason, the major source of foreign exchange is oil revenue, and the price has gone down by more than 30%. So it's only realistic for government to present a budget that will reflect this decrease. So I support, this amendment. I urge all my colleagues to do the same. But Mr. President, there is one more thing. Mr. President, we need to really liberate the economy. And for that reason, budgetary provision alone is not enough. We need stimulus package that will generate a lot of economic activities. This is the time government should come up. This is the time government should come up with a stimulus package that will affect all the sectors of the economy so that we will get out of the loop. Otherwise, we will go into serious recession. Other countries are doing the same. And I don't see why Nigerian government should not do that. So I would urge the executive to come up with a stimulus package that will reflect the economy. And I also want all my colleagues to support this assertion. Thank you very much.
The Deputy Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Very distinguished colleagues. I am Senator Boacha Emmanuel from Taraba State. I represent Taraba South, to be precise. Mr. President, I want to say that it is true that the COVID-19 pandemic had wreaked substantial havoc to our economy and to global economy. It is also true that what we're crying for, other clients, other nations are doing the same, but the degree of damage varies from one country to the other. Other countries who plan ahead may not suffer the same level of pains that we suffer, probably because we refuse to plan ahead. But having said this, let me add that I see this amendment as being okay, but I want to believe that the reduction to tally with the pains that is ongoing is not, to match with what we have. Our capacity to implement the budget is not sufficient in the sense that we passed 10.7 and I see a reduction of 200 billion. In my own opinion, is not sufficient because at the end of the day, we may maybe end up returning the same thing. I was looking at going further, maybe at the region of even 30%, if we are going to be realistic. But in doing this, we must also de-emphasize safe, in the sense that it's a time that this country is going to pay dearly for the past mistakes. The past mistakes of looking only on oil to survive as a nation. And if we had taken seriously the anthem of diversification we've been singing, the experience will have differed. Unfortunately, we didn't, because with due apology, because we're a stiff-necked people. We don't learn lessons at all. So I am lending my support to this amendment with an emphasis that we have to go further even to reduce more from this to match the challenges ahead. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Honorable Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. President. My distinguished and respected colleagues, Senator Albert Bassi, Aquarum Northeast. Mr. President, I rise to support this debate and to say that these are very challenging times, not just for our country, but also globally. Mr. President, if for me, in every challenge I look at the opportunities. One of the areas that we have actually sat back as a country to reflect on, in line with this pandemic, is that at least for once upon a time, Mr. President, we have suspended the issue of fuel subsidy. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I'm aware that just about last year, we've spent over 2.1 trillion on this monster. So I believe that with the complete eradication of fuel subsidy, Mr. President, and looking at other areas where we can actually boost economic activity, especially at this point in time, I think it's an effort in the right direction. Mr. President, I also want to commend NNPC for also seeing reasons why we must suspend most of our capital projects in the oil and gas sector. Of course, it's not the best time for us in that sector, and by almost 5%, contributing about 1.2 trillion to this readjustment. So efforts done in the oil and gas sector is how we can sustain the production at this current pace, and then we look into 2021 with all amount of hope. Mr. President, I believe that as a parliament, we have a major role to play. Fine, there appears to be an upward increase in the price of oil, but this we cannot be overconfident in this regard. So I believe that as a parliament,
we must increase and enhance our oversight such that when this revised budget is passed, Mr. President, then we have very limited time to ensure that this budget achieved its desired implementation level, so that the economy can actually see the impact of our considerations in this matter. So I rise to support this and enjoin all my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, Mr. President, and God bless you.
Senator,
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, my name is Netu Chelina Nefuniyo. Mr. President, I come from Anambra State. First of all, Mr. President, let me commend you for being very sensitive to the plight of Nigerians in this era of serious reduction in the earnings from our main source of income, that is the oil. Mr. President, all over the world, countries come up with their plans, short-term plans, medium-term plans, and long-term plans. We need to know where exactly the country is going. What happened around the world on this COVID-19? It is clear that we have to begin to plan how this country can come out from being consumption country to production country. And we can't do that, Mr. President, without investing in our locally manufactured goods. Mr. President, what we are crying about today is the reduction in the earnings from oil. What if tomorrow we go to get the oil and we get water? What happens? We pray that day does not come, but nobody is sure whether it will come. So I think this has given us the opportunity to look inwards, to see what we can do as a country, to deviate from being mono-economy to a better economy. Mr. President, they say that necessity is the mother of invention. We have to tap into the advantages afforded by this COVID-19.
This is $10,000 in my hand right here. This is the amount of money that I make every single day with my online business. And in this free training that I'm giving you an invitation to, I'm not only going to show you how you can make the same sort of money exactly how I do, but I'm going to be giving this money away to attendees of this limited time training. Now, I will be going over how to make money online in this training using nothing more than a computer. Using nothing more than a computer. No sales. This doesn't involve any talking to people or calling people up on the phone asking them for money. This doesn't involve any buying products from China to sell them on Amazon or eBay, any drop shipping, e-commerce sort of stuff. This doesn't require you to have any sort of virtual assistants where you're taking work and outsourcing it to people and you still have to deal with employees. And this doesn't require you to build up or have any sort of social media following, being popular on Instagram or YouTube or any of that stuff. All this training will be going over is how you can use a computer to earn money that goes directly into your bank account without talking to anybody and making this sort of money. Let me show you my actual stats right here of what I'm doing every single day. So this is just one of my accounts.
So now, yes, appointment when I get, where they give like this and I go collect.
Now because you never drink Mama Genge beer before. If you drink, very chill, emotional standard. It will be like Hamatan. Yes, you be clean slow. Where will you come in from the bottom?
And here you can see, these are the amounts, this is the amount I'm making each month.
Hey, Sister Bigetu, anybody who is this country,
I made $339,000.
just to help them. I want the need build this house in all areas and nobody will ask me. I know someone you're going to get asked me. 2 years. I hear you went to. I'm not. And then you know. Yara yoro. Yara yoro. I'm going to sleep like this. They share money for drink. I don't put to collect your own. Why you not going to see what they do? I am not understanding. In my video, they see that I'm not saying that we want to pay because we will be citizens of this country. When I say that, all of us what do you drink? Which kind of alcohol drink before you start? And look, if you not drink before you start, that is a shame for you. That makes you drink this guy impossible. I'm not ready. Even Sister Bridget, is that a dream? Yes, Sister Bridget is that. Landlord make I come outside. We get general meeting for compound. Landlord, general meeting. Wait, I hope landlord foul not the list because we never take any power of recent.
No be foul issue. Like in a house and come outside.
If this your dream just come true, let me say we don't have our life better. We will go open better Shira when you go to prophesy this people. Shira has a church. And we will just put the two. We run the side by side. That way we will accommodate believers and unbelievers. And we will go get multiple streams. But before that, we will go to the meeting, go confirm whether you don't really get the gift of vision. Atman is you now. I told you now, you said I was right.
Jetzt müssen sie sich im Rücken anbieten, da ist Robinho und die Chance fast vorbei, Ronaldinho.
Everybody is aware of
Cicinho.
Now, they talk about the fact that the first day, things is hard. To even shop,
Knappe Entscheidung.
As a result of that, I have decided to do
Sehr
something
knappe
about
Entscheidung. Allenfalls gleiche Höhe und dann kein Absatz.
What are these men?
Kaci sieht gelb nach dem Foul an. Raum ist eng, Ronaldo, Inamoto sauber. 1, 2, 3 Übersteiger, Ronaldinho, wann kommt der Abschluss? Hier, Ronaldinho. Kaum Gefahr.
Made up my mind.
Schwache Flanke. Nakata. Sperren ohne Ball, so sieht es Pula. Gegen Gilberto gibt es Nakamura. Und er kommt gut. Absatz. Hinter ist Cicinho. Da ist Ronaldo.
Because now your baba, your father, he helped me to build this house. I been when they build them, you follow them do very so pay. Because it no be so, you go tell me say make you no pay for children. Hey, that man no tell me, make it use the house free of charge. Hey, now talking about too much. Failure to comply, failure to pay 2 years house rent in advance. Before the end of this month. I will give the person quick notice. Oh, Bunny! Landlord, me, I don't have money. I don't want to pay for 2 years, because if I conk you with my 200, you don't know how you help. You don't even do that. What do you not do? Not be your dream. I make one of because increase them to 2 years. I'm not telling you, not a stiff after you. Then I'm not telling you. You don't go back to it. Why would I see thing and you have? I don't think everything I do, right?
So what is this three-step formula that's allowed me to enroll over 1,000 people in business, time top runner without ever having to
Yoshikatsu Kawaguchi war im ersten Durchgang unter den Jahren.
And I'll show you. So my simple three-step process is something that I call TAP.
Kaji steht nicht ideal in der Mitte. Den Pokasabara.
You see, whenever I was trying to show my business to anyone and everyone with I was met with a ton of rejection and resistance because I was primarily dealing with people who didn't always have the desire to consume what I was offering. But once I discovered that there were really not that I could start targeting who already wanted what I was offering.
I don't tell you. I say you know which is share fit for me. Which type of I know you now. Now political sharing is the one you even me, I don't have the idea. Because it's going to be wrong if you don't have to hear it. So this poor people when I want to when I forget that I mean donate device. If you donate device, it's not me that donate the store and pepper. Now we use to keep device. No mind now me bring the kerosene, plug the Maggi.
All you need to do is click the link that you see on or around this video somewhere and register your details on the very next page. Now, step number 2 that I'm going to be teaching you when you attend that web class is all about how to attract your perfect prospects to you and simultaneously cultivate a relationship with them. The way I'm going to show you this on the web class is by showing you the 5 best types of messages to put in front of your perfect prospects as early as tomorrow to not only get them chasing you, but to simultaneously build a relationship with your prospects so that they know who you are and they trust you, which is ultimately going to make step number 3, converting them into sales, a heck of a lot easier than you trying to be a pushy salesperson with a bunch of strangers. And I can tell you from experience that converting your leads into sales will get a whole lot easier when people know who you are and trust you before you introduce your product and tell them about your service opportunity. And of course, I'm going to show you exactly how to do all of this on the free web class. And here's the best news of all. Everything I'm going to be showing you how to do on this web class can be done with very little technical setup. You don't have to have a capture page. You don't have to set up Where is the best place to get leads online for your business? You don't have to have YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or you don't have to buy expensive software. If you are a small business, none of that technical stuff is required. The stuff that bogs so many business owners down. Literally, when you start...
There were 5 of them. Of course, by 2021, we'll have more money. Finance the budget. So, Mr. President, I encourage us to seriously look at the issue of passing the PRB bill so that just like we did for the PS, which has brought in more funding into the budget. So, Mr. President, I, like other colleagues, in spite of these shortcomings, we want to support seriously that we should amend the 2020 budget in line with the circumstances that we found ourselves, Mr. President. I so submit.
Thank you. Senator Yusuf.
Thank you, Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues. Basically, my comments are on the economy first and then on the budget. And I believe we are discussing the budget as well as management of the budget. On the economy, we are saying that we are depreciating the value of the Naira by a percentage. Now, the cost of maintaining or managing the value of the Naira, Mr. President and my distinguished colleagues, is very, very enormous. I give you an example. Today, the open market operation instruments and NTBs issued by both the CBN and the federal government is about 15 trillion Naira. And all that one is just used to defend or to protect the value of the Naira. If that money would have been utilized for the purpose of financing our agriculture, financing our solid minerals as a means of diversifying the economy, by now we would have been having a lower value of the naira. Secondly, sir, whatever happens to this budget has its also roots from the monetary policy. The monetary policy is not coordinating well with the fiscal policy. And the government cannot do it alone. Everywhere in the world is government plus the private sector. The management of our money deposit banks, has to be taken, is my concern, because the management is not done in such a way as they will participate as also instruments of developing the economy. I'll give you examples, sir. The money deposit banks are not financing agriculture, especially the production aspect. Despite the fact that we have instruments of guaranteeing the loans they are going to issue, the banks do not want to go into the production of agriculture, to finance the production of agriculture in this country. So, Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, we cannot run away from creating areas of preference in the management of this economy. If the banks do not want to go into areas of agriculture, especially production, which they feel is very risky, and it is also our preferred area, especially COVID and post-COVID, whether we like it or not, agriculture and solid minerals are going to be the fundamental that is going to put this country ahead. So my suggestion.
Point of order, Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. My highly respected additional colleagues, I would like to, with your permission, move a motion for the Senate to suspend its Rule 13 in order for us to sit beyond the appointed time. I so move.
Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I so second.
Distinguished colleagues, those in favor of the motion that we suspend our standing order 13 to enable us sit beyond 2 o'clock, say aye. Those against, say nay. Ayes have it. Continue. Round up.
So what I was saying is that the government cannot do it alone. The banks, or especially the money deposit banks and the other developing banks, they must be made to be part and parcel of the rescue operation of the economy of this country. And one of the ways, in my own opinion, they should be able to do is let us regard agriculture as a preferred sector of this economy. It is contributing more in GDP. It is also contributing more in employment and what have you. So my suggestion here is that to augment the success and the management of the budget is that we should create, or we should allow, or we should make the government create what I call sectoral allocation of credit by the money deposit banks. But I don't want it to be done by fiat. I want it to be done by the fiscal policy. Of course, we are going to...
Distinguished, you can round up now, please.
Of course, we are going to lose revenue on one side, but we are going to gain in terms of developing of this country. So my suggestion is that we should have guided sectoral allocation of credit for the banks to also augment for the development of this country and also for the success of this budget. Thirdly and finally, banks are saying that they do not have long-term funds and therefore they do not want to come into financing of this. So everywhere in the world, insurance companies own banks and not banks owning insurance companies. Therefore, we should look into the possibility of creating long-term funds by creating, insurance funds through maybe life policies and what have you. So this, my little contribution, is to guide, the formulation, not just the formulation, but the management of this budget. Thank you very much.
Distinguished colleagues, I will suggest that we limit our contributions to maybe 2 minutes so that we're able to leave this place, because this mask, keeping it there for a long time could be also problematic. Senator James Maja.
Thank you, Mr. President, my highly respected colleagues. James Ibio, Manager, Delta South. Mr. President, there is hardly any senator here that would oppose to this amendment of the budget. As at the end of last year, when we were passing this budget, nobody had ever thought that the whole world will come to a standstill during this period. And therefore, it has become inevitable that the budget that we passed in December last year must be tinkered with. And that is what the executive has done. And that's the reason why you have summoned us back to this place, whereas we are going to Tuesday next week for the Salah break. But from what I have seen, which is good, because everybody is in support of this amendment, but the submission of Gabriel Suswan is very germane, and I want the two committees from which this amendment of the budget has been referred to take a critical look at what the submissions of Gabriel Suswan, the Finance Committee and the Appropriation Committees, they have their job cut out for them. Quite a lot of things must be done. We look at this budget from the parliamentary point of view, so that whatever we are doing, it must be how to provide palliatives that will alleviate the sufferings of Nigerians, because that is what this amendment is all about. All over the world, including human beings. Individual human beings, everybody is adjusting, because nobody had ever thought that this was going to come. And the whole world is in a standstill now. And therefore, Mr. President, for Nigerians who have been suffering for the past 3 to 4 months, whatever we are going to do here, as far as this amendment of the budget is concerned, is how to provide succor to Nigerians. And that must be the focus. Mr. President, I support this amendment wholeheartedly, and I urge my colleagues to also support it with a view to alleviating the sufferings of all Nigerians. Thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity.
Senator Brown, number 1.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am Senator Ibrahim Abdullahi Dambaba, representing Sokoto South Senatorial District. In fact, what I had wanted to say had already been captured by Senator Suswan. So my reservation was mainly going to be based on the issue of the deficit and taking into cognizance the global economic downturn, how we will be able to finance this budget of 10.5 trillion. That is basically my main concern, and most of the issues that, almost all the issues that I had wanted to raise actually have been raised by Senator Suswan.
Senator Afanyuba. Senator Geshambasi.
Thank you, Mr. President. Geshambasi, Cross River South. Mr. President, let me wholeheartedly support this amendment to our budget. I think it is a stitch in time, and I think that it's a very apt response to what has happened to us in our country with the COVID pandemic. But there are just 2 quick areas that I want us to consider as we go. I want to re-echo the Senator Alero in the issue of a quick stimulus package. I think that with the COVID pandemic, the issues of recession have become germane, and it is very clear that very soon, unless something is quickly done, we may be headed into recession. So the need for a quick stimulus package, which is focused particularly to infrastructure and to job creation and stimulating the economy, is extremely important. The second issue that I think we must consider is the issue of the excess crude account. Clearly, as the price of oil goes up, and with our benchmark at 25 or 27, as the case may be, there will be an issue of excess crude accounts, because all monies above that will go into the excess crude. So I think it's important that we in this chamber, along with the executive, begin to quickly examine the issue of the excess crude accounts. With those contributions, I urge everybody in this chamber to support this budget amendment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Senator Smart.
Mr. President, I rise to support this bill. In doing that, Mr. President, I'll be speaking against the background of one of our duty or responsibility as legislators to generate ideas for good governance. Mr. President, I just want to suggest that I think the time has come more than ever before for us to look at the possibility of how we can really develop agriculture, especially in the area of cash crop, that could give us some foreign exchange, foreign earnings for our nation. Equally, Mr. President, iron and steel complex is vital to our economy, not just the industrialization of Nigeria, but in equally ensuring that, in fact, within the African countries, they could patronize us, and Nigeria could be the main supplier of iron and steel in our continent. And that, of course, will equally improve our revenue base. Within the country, Mr. President, our revenue nets is still very much limited. There are still areas where Nigeria do not seem to care about generating revenue. I think, Mr. President, the time has come for our nation to look at how we can introduce toll gates in our highways, especially those who drive in exotic cars, so that they could equally help in improving our revenue base. In the last decade or so, we used to have some of these toll gates, but suddenly they were removed by the other party when they were in government. I think the time has come for those who drive in exotic cars, SUV cars, to pay toll while they patronize these cars. Again, Mr. President, I think I should equally mention that those who live in mansions in our cities, those who have taken so much from the society, now that the society is bleeding, before the masses will rise, I think we should start looking at the possibility of introducing property tax for those who live in mansions, to start paying back to the society to save the economy of our nation from collapsing. Mr. President, you are living witness to what happened on several occasions in the 6th and 7th Senate, when we were asking the government of the day at that time to diversify the economy. At the time, oil was selling at $100, $120, $150. That party squandered our resources. Now the time has come for us to face what some of us stood for. You are part of those who are in the struggle there, that we should diversify the economy. Nigeria is a country where people forget easily. Oil at one time was selling at $150 per barrel. Roads were not built, rail lines were not constructed. Where did the money go? Who were the people who were in charge of our resources when we were selling at $150 per barrel? They squandered the money. I pity this president, I pity this government, that they have to cope with the challenge of the fact that oil is selling at is now good for $22, $25, $30. At the time it was selling for $150, we were telling them here on this same chamber, you were part of it, that we should diversify the economy. But that party refused to diversify. This party, they squander our resources. Now we are facing the basic. I think when we are talking about commending what this government is trying to do, we should not forget in a hurry that some people were charged with the responsibility of managing our economy when we were selling oil at $150. Nothing was done. Iron and steel complex was not constructed, was not completed. In fact, they unbundled our properties. They sold our collective wealth to some people. So when we are looking at the budget, we must look at the past. What brought us to this level? It was not because some people failed to plan when they were supposed to plan. Some people failed to utilize the opportunity we had at that time. And we were here telling them, let us diversify. Now that we are facing this problem, we should remember those who ruined our economy.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Samata Deemi, the comrade. Senator Michael Bamidele Pemi.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I'm Michael Okweyemi Bamidele. I represent Ekiti Central Senatorial District. Mr. President, I join the rest of my colleagues in expressing support for this very important bill. And in doing this, Mr. President, I also join in the debate of the general principles of this bill to say, in a nutshell, that I am personally impressed, and I'm sure a lot of Nigerians are also impressed, that whatever adjustment was being made to the 2020 Appropriation Act, our health sector, and whatever had been appropriated for the running of the health sector was left intact. This is very significant. And this is consistent with the realities on ground and the mood of the country and the global pandemic situation. I also note, Mr. President, that the agricultural sector was also given due consideration. Mr. President, in principle, it is also my own very candid opinion that the judiciary and the justice sector must be given due consideration, regardless of what the situation is. And this is what we show that we have a thorough understanding of the political economy of budget adjustment as we are trying to do. Distinguished Chief Whip. Order. Mr. President, this is not right.
Go ahead on.
Mr. President, the budget of the judiciary is about 1%, exactly 1% of the entire budget of this country. The judiciary is an arm of government, the third arm of government. And regardless of what must be informing this adjustment, to have the budget of the judiciary reduced from 110 billion, which was a paltry sum in the first instance, to 99 billion, does not show a thorough understanding by the bureaucrats who did this adjustment of the fact that even when we are talking about COVID-19 and the challenges, there are issues, including human rights issues and various other issues that the judiciary is having to deal with, that the justice sector is having to deal with. And while COVID-19 challenges are going on, issues of insecurity on a daily basis also generate more work for the judiciary. As we speak, we have about 5,000 people, detainees, who are awaiting trial, and it means more work for the judiciary. So essentially, Mr. President, I am strongly of the opinion that the budget of the judiciary should be left intact, adopting the same principle that was adopted in considering the appropriation to the health sector and to the agri sector, because the judiciary has more responsibilities. And like I said, and I want to reemphasize this again, that the budget of the judiciary is less than 1% of this entire budget, and that there will be no reason whatsoever to further cut this budget. Reducing it by 11 billion as has been proposed in this bill, of course, it's only 11 billion to the Federal Republic of Nigeria, but it means so much damage and challenge
to the justice sector and to our judicial sector. And so in supporting this bill, Mr. President, I want to emphasize very strongly that this parliament will be doing Nigerians a lot of good by ensuring that the budget of the judiciary as originally proposed and appropriated by this parliament is left intact. I thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Francis Adams.
Mr. President, my name is Francis Adenigba Fadansi, representing the good people of Osun East. My main concern on this budget is the official exchange rate. Already, there is an inflation. With this exchange rate from 305 to 360, now from 360 again to 385, the adverse effect on the economy will be very severe unless there are no importations. And the budget is telling us that the huge foreign exchange is consumed by these importers and exporters. Automatically, the budget must find solution. We have to find solution to cushion effect of the importation that is coming in, that the prices will be skyrocketed and the society will be worse than for it. On that, apart from the budget of the National Assembly that we are always defending that is very small.
Distinguished Senator, I think you can round up now. Senator Edigian.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. I remain Senator Idi Gyang from Plateau North. Mr. President, my contribution on this very important review of the 2020 budget would be that we are now face to face with the consequence of our reliance on a mono economy with oil as the major source of our revenue earnings. And what the nation is losing in oil revenue has now shifted to over-reliance on borrowing from both external and local sources. And the implication is a rising debt profile. We'll recall that previous governments in the past made effort to get Nigeria out of the debt burden, but today we are again reintroducing ourselves into that very cage. Of course, we have the initial approvals that we've done in this by the National Assembly of $750 billion US dollars and 850 billion in local sources to be sourced to in order to fund the budget. Mr. President, the projects so earmarked should be ones that will have multiplier economic impact that will eventually ease the repayment and servicing of the debts that we are about to incur. And it is so important because generations after will be left with this burden that we are now bringing upon ourselves. And it is hoped that as we focus on other areas of diversification, in order to overcome in the future the need for us to be borrowing, it becomes very important that those sectors of the economy that will help us to be self-reliant will be given attention to particularly the agri sector and the solid minerals sector. I therefore, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, say that again, suggest strict and consensus utilization of the debts that will be incurring to ensure the ease of repayments from these and subsequent generations. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Senator Matthew Orogide.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm Senator Matthew Orogide. I represent Edo South Central District. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, first let me say that in its entirety, I support this amendment that is being sought. But I have one or two things to comment about, Mr. President. Number one, under statutory transfers, where of course we have gone from 560 billion to 398 billion. There are three interventionist agencies of government, namely the NDDC, and then of course the North-East Development Commission, and then of course the Basic Healthcare Fund. In fact, each of them has gone from about 40 to 50% reduction. The NDDC and the NEDC, we know their position right now, particularly the NEDC that is still in its formative stage, the North-East Development Commission, having to reduce their transfer by about 50%. I think that is huge. And then, of course, what COVID-19 has exposed to us in Nigeria is near the steady state of our healthcare services in Nigeria. So to go again from 44 billion to 25 billion, that is a huge reduction. I think we should look at that. And that is why the statutory transfer that dropped from 560 to 398 is huge. Mr. President, if you look at the amendment that is being sought, majorly debt servicing is that issue, from 2.4 trillion to 2.9 trillion. Mr. President, yes, debt servicing because we are borrowing hugely. But I think we are not unmindful of the things too that are in the works, particularly the negotiations we are supposed to have with both our bilateral and multilateral creditors. I think the Ministry of Finance, DMO, other agents of government that are connected with this, I think this is the time, because the COVID-19 too has exposed to the whole world that since we have diminished economy, where of course we have depression in the economy of the world, a lot of our external lenders will be disposed to it. So this our borrowing and of course what we have earmarked to service our loans is very huge. And finally, Mr. President, we have looked at this issue of COVID-19 intervention fund. I mean, when Senator Bamdele was talking, he said 99 billion going to an arm of government. COVID-19 intervention here is 213.5 billion. That again, if it is only for isolation centers and buying of ventilators, of course, what we have in basic health is 25 billion compared to the 213.5 billion going to COVID-19 intervention. The disparity is too huge. Therefore, we must break down the 213.5 billion intervention for COVID-19. It must be a lot clearer to us, because what is there for basic health, 25 billion, COVID-19 is 213 billion. The disparity asks for a lot of amendment. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Senator Ibrahim Lorobi.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. I'm Ibrahim Yaya Oloriegbe. I represent Kwara Central. Mr. President, just like previous speakers, I support the amendment, as it is obvious and necessary that the budget must be amended given the circumstances. My short contribution is to call that the amendment is coming because of COVID-19, and one of the sectors that is majorly affected is health. However, from the amendment that is being proposed, rather than addressing the obvious challenges all of us agree is in our health sector, we have reduced tremendously the resources we are allocating to health. Whereas, Mr. President, the overall budget is reduced by 2%. The fund that was allocated to address basic health care in Nigeria in the original budget was 44 billion, just like the last speaker said. But through this amendment, that fund was cut by 34% to 25 billion. How do we now say that we are addressing the challenges we have in the health sector? Because even if we ease and we go out, the challenges of COVID-19 remain with us for the next 2 years. The reason is because until when we have adequate treatment and we have vaccines, we cannot say that we are free, and then the health sector is exposed. The second thing is that the capital allocation to the health sector is reduced by 25% in this proposed amendment. How do we improve the infrastructure? And I saw in the document that was given to us in terms of the MTEF that there's 186 billion allocated, but I didn't see where that is in this the main budget itself. Is that intervention from the CBN, which is extra budgetary, or is it within the budget? The total COVID-19 allocation here, just like that speaker said, is 100. But in the printed budget is 213. We don't have the details. So, Mr. President, my submission is that while the committee is considering it, we should put our resources where it is needed. We should be able to look at an adjustment that will improve the health infrastructures and health services of this country at this particular time, so that we don't go into more trouble. So, thank you, Mr.
Senator Surajudeen Ajibola.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm Dr. Surajudeen Ajibola Bashir. I represent people of Osun Central. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I think basically I support the proposition, but it's to call attention to the fact that going forward, certain things need to give way in terms of how we conduct governance in this country. Looking at the budget of about 10.59 trillion, the component of debt servicing 2.9 billion, then the recurrent expenditure 4.9 billion, the total of that will be about 8 trillion. It speaks to the fact that we need to address the size of governance that we have in this country. The total that is going to capital expenditure, even with the capital receipt, when it is considered, is actually abysmally low for us to be able to plan and develop for the future. And in rounding up, a lot of people have said what I would have said, is to support the fact that when we are talking about budget being made to address the challenges of COVID-19, I support Senator Bamidele Okoyemi that the COVID-19 has raised problem for judicial sector. Now we are talking about factual hearing, talking about social distancing in the context of judicial sector. Some of our courts don't even have electricity. Some of our courts, they don't have modern facility. The bandwidth they use for internet is not there. I think looking at the money earmarked for COVID-19 intervention in the budget, there may be a need to look into that and see that there's a need for special intervention in judicial sector reform. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, distinguished colleagues. I'll put the question now. Those in favor that this bill be now read a second time, say aye. Those against, say nay. The ayes have it. Clerk of the Senate.
Mr. President, distinguished senators, a bill for an act to amend the Appropriation Act 2020 to authorize the issue out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the Federation the total sum of 10,509,654,033,500
naira only, of which 398 billion 505 million 979,362 naira only is for statutory transfers. 2,951 billion 710 million only is for debt service. 4,928 billion 525 million 467,849 naira only is for recurrent non-debt expenditure, while the sum of 2,230 billion 912 million 585,842 naira only is for contribution to the Development Fund for capital expenditure for the year ending on the 31st day of December 2020, second reading.
A bill for an act to amend the Appropriation Act 2020 to authorize the issue out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the Federation, the total sum of 10,509,654,033 naira 54 kobo only, of which 398,505,979,362 naira only is for statutory transfers. 2,951,710 million only is for debt service. 4,928,525,467,849 naira only is for recurrent non-debt expenditure, while the sum of 2,230,912,585,842 naira only is for contribution to the Development Fund for capital expenditure for the year ending on the 31st day of December 2020, second reading taken. And the bill is referred to the Senate Committee on Appropriations to report back by Tuesday. Thank you very much, distinguished colleagues. Leader of the Senate. We have extended time already. We have a motion. Okay.
My highly respected and distinguished colleagues, the only order of the day is a motion standing in the name of distinguished Senator Stephen Christopher Epenyo. With his permission, I would like to move the motion for this motion to be stood down so that we can take it another legislative day. I so move.
Minority Leader.
So second, Mr. President.
Distinguished colleagues, those in favor that we stand down the consideration of this motion, say aye. Those against, say nay. The ayes have it. Well, distinguished colleagues, we have come to the end of today's session, and thank you very much for the various contributions. Before we adjourn, let me remind our committees on appropriations, finance, and domestic and foreign loans on the need for them to work out through the weekend to ensure that we have the reports on Tuesday unfailingly by the grace of God. I wish you the best of luck and look for your committees. Sorry? No, at the moment, upstream has no role at the moment. Yes. So we expect that we shall have the reports laid here unfailingly. Time is of essence. Nigeria is waiting for us. Before we adjourn, let me read a letter from Senator Dr. Akita Kabir Ibrahim Gaya, FNIA. Dear sir, letter of appreciation. On behalf of myself and my family, I would like to extend my utmost appreciation to His Excellency, the Senate President, the Deputy Senate President, the leadership, and my distinguished colleagues for the condolence messages, calls, and visits for the demise of my late wife, Hajia Halima Gaya. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant her beautiful soul, Jannatul Firdaus. We deeply appreciate your kind expression of sympathy in this time of sorrow. Your support during this difficult time has made a tremendous impact on myself and my family, and we hereby express our gratitude. I would like to thank and appreciate the heartfelt sympathies of the President of the Senate, Dr. Ahmed Lawan, the leadership, and my distinguished colleagues. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide, protect, and bless you all. Signed, Senator Dr. Architect Kabiru Ibrahim Gaya, FNI, Kano South. Thank you very much. Distinguished colleagues, the Senate is hereby adjourned till Tuesday, the 2nd day of June 2020 at 10 a.m. prompt.